Hi, this is Leili with In Vivo Leadership Strategies, and this is Integrity Over Scale podcast. Welcome to Integrity Over Scale podcast. I am your host, Leili Sadaghiani. Before we get started, I just wanted to say it's been a while since I've done a solo episode, so I'm super excited to sit with you and talk about a very important topic, which has to do with making tough decisions and how to keep yourself aligned with those tough decisions. We also need to do a podcast with my co-host for sure. So that will be something that will come up soon. I've had a wonderful time with all the guests that we've had so far on the podcast, and I've learned so much from them. But I really wanted to take a pause and talk about some of the subjects that have been on my mind, quite honestly, in leadership, in coaching, and consulting for a while now. And the one that we want to talk about today has to do with exactly what I shared with you, making those hard calls. So with that said, let's go into the topic. This is a solo episode, so it's just you and me. And I want to talk to you in the way that I would if you were sitting right across from me in a session that we've had together. And maybe you're driving right now, and maybe you're out walking or doing the dishes. However you are listening to this and wherever you're listening to this, I just wanted to say thank you. It is a world full of podcasts out there. And so to be chosen to be listened to today means the world to me. Okay, enough about that. Let's go into today's topic. And this is the one that I feel like a lot of leaders feel uncomfortable with. It sounds like, why does it feel like everyone else gets the benefit of the doubt and then I get the audit? Or I made a good call and I'm still defending it 3 weeks later with what I did. Or honestly, I've kind of stopped trusting my own judgment because I spent so much time and energy bracing for how it's going to land with other people. And I'm just so sick and tired of it. If any of these resonate with you, this is for you. It is such an important topic that I've made part 1 today. And I will create part 2 for you later because it's so long and it's so complex that I did not want you to have to sit for 2 hours to listen to me go on and on and on about this. And what I would ask you to do is, as we are reviewing the segments that I have for you, sit with it after this podcast, live your life in vivo. So apply it to your life and then come to part 2 when it's ready and start to think about a much more complex way of practicing this in your life. Now, I want to name something dynamic clearly when we talk about making hard calls together, because so much of its power comes from the fact that nobody really spends time labeling what's happening to them. Like context and the things that happen to us, we don't really spend enough time. We just want to run and do things without really reflecting on what's happening to us. And when a thing doesn't have a name, you tend to assume it's personal flaw, right? You assume, for instance, one of the things that I know, because I'm a very highly sensitive person, that I get quite a lot in my life is, you're too sensitive. As a woman, I hear you're not confident enough. I've even had a lot of men tell me, people tell me I have self-esteem issues, or you're just imagining an extra weight that's on you or extra set of eyes that are on you. So let's take that off the table right now, because there's actually a really well-documented pattern in research where certain people have to prove their confidence over and over again. And I, by the way, say competence, not confidence. So I just wanted to make sure you heard that okay, because competence here is very different, right? It's my ability to prove that I can do things, and other people get to prove it once in the scenario that we're talking about. Now, legal scholar Joan Williams founded the Center for Work-Life Law and calls one version of this prove it again. Some leaders get the benefit of the doubt automatically. Their past wins carry forward. One good decision buys them a whole reputation. Casey Beck, who is a pilot and an instructor, if you haven't listened to that episode, she does a fantastic job of telling us how many times she's had to prove herself over and over again because she's a woman. And if she makes a mistake versus a male pilot instructor that makes a mistake, people notice that a lot more because she happens to be the only woman in the group. So besides that, your past wins and all of that basically carries forward, right? In one shape or another, just depending on who you are. So one good decision buys them a whole reputation. And then other leaders start every single decision back at zero, having to reestablish that they even belong there, no matter how many times they've already proven it over and over again. I can really relate to this because in the field of works that I have been, I feel like every single day is like a complete start new, start new, start new. It burns me out every single time when I'm in a situation like that. So when you are in the group that I'm in, that second group, a hard call is never just a hard call. There's a test in there, isn't it? And you can feel the difference because the same decision that would sail right through one person becomes your judgment is wrong. You don't know what you're doing for another person. Okay. And there's older research underneath this too. So back in 1977, there was a sociologist, Rosabeth Moss Cantor, and wrote this landmark study of corporate life. And she looked at what happens to people who are the only one or one of the very few in a given room. And she found that being that visible to others does something really specific to you. Your mistakes get unnoticed and remembered a lot more. That visibility changes how people are going to behave. So some are going to overperform and burn out. Hello, me. Some shrink to get out of the spotlight. I've also done that where I hide myself. I'm like, this is too much. And both of those are the same thing underneath. They're both responses to being watched more closely. And that's the whole idea, is that you're being watched closely. So you feel like you have to act and perform in a certain way. And I'll tell you why I'm so careful when we talk about this, because with all the research for years, I did the thing that so many high achievers do, because believe it or not, I am an achiever. This is one of my top strengths. When I felt extra scrutiny, I just assumed it was a flaw within me. I figured if I could just be a little better, more prepared, a little more polished, it would go away. So what happens? I'm not really hitting the core problem. What I'm thinking is just work harder, be better, be smarter, blah, 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 blah. So I worked harder, I prepared more, I overbuilt every single case. And you know what happened? Nothing. It didn't go away because it was never really about the quality of my work. And all of that extra effort aimed at a problem that wasn't actually mine to fix. And it cost me energy that I could have spent on things that mattered a lot more. And honestly, as a woman in the field of leadership, even in corporate world specifically, I am still running into this so much. But the day I finally understood that this pattern is real and it's documented and not some personal deficiency of mine, that was the day I could stop trying to out-prepare a bias and start building something that actually worked. I'm not telling you the world is out to get you. That's not at all what this podcast is about. It will never be what I will tell you. I'm telling you that if your decisions feel like they're getting a second look that other people don't get, the research says, hey, you know what? You are probably reading the room correctly. It has to do so much with the culture, with the people that are in there. Maybe you're working with someone who is very insecure, and so it's their way of making themselves feel good. It could be so many ways, but you are reading the room. And that matters because you can't build a real strategy on top of a feeling that you keep talking yourself out of. If I do this better, no. Naming this correctly also is not self-pity. We're not talking about victimizing yourself, okay? It's the first actual piece of strategy because you can't fix a problem you keep misdiagnosing as your own inadequacy. We talk a lot about how unfair it is to be scrutinized more, and that's true. It deserves to be said. It's completely unfair. In fact, we can sit on it all day long and we can talk about it. Sure, there's plenty of podcasts that you can listen to that talk about how unfair life is at the moment. But I'm actually more interested in something else that I always tell leaders, which is what that scrutiny does to the decisions themselves. Because that's the parts that actually in your control. We care a lot about what's in our control. And it's the part that really costs us a lot if we're not being very careful. What do I mean by that? So when you know you're going to be examined closely, what does your brain do? Part of you is going to work on the actual decision. And then there's this other part of you is running this whole parallel process in the background, thinking about the kind of audience that is going to look at this and respond to it? How's this going to look? Who's going to push back? What's my defense? So what does this do? You become super diligent. It feels like you're just being very thorough, but it's actually pulling from the exact same mental bandwidth you need to make the decision in itself. So you end up making really important calls with a fraction of your actual capacity because the rest of it is managing the perception of others. And that's kind of ironic, right? Because the very thing you're afraid of that people will see is your judgment weaker or not, that actually becomes more likely because you're deciding with half a brain. And the scrutiny doesn't just sit outside of the decision. It climbs inside it and makes it even worse. And I see this show up in 3 specific distortion over and over again in the leaders that I've worked with in the past. So the first one that I want to talk about is over-justification. You stop deciding and you start building a legal case. I joke around with people that I've talked to about this in the past. I say, like, all of a sudden you're like, you have a law degree. You gather 3 times the evidence and like nobody asked for it, but you have it in there. And it's not because the decision is going to call for it, but because you're thinking, well, every perception and every possibility I have to think about, I have to know what's going to be my pre-armor with this interrogation that I may or may not have, that may or may not come up. And that burns a ton of time. And even worse, it trains everyone around you to expect that level of proof from you specifically. So one of the things that I've heard past clients tell me is, how come I have to give detailed description and then this person doesn't have to? And my question is, what has been done in the past? What have you done in the past? Well, I always give this many pages and I shared this many things. And I said, that's probably the reason why. Because now you've built that expectation of over justification. And so people think that's exactly what they're going to get from you. So when you are not reacting that way in future projects, they're wondering what's going on. So that's our first one. Now, our second one is hedging. You take a clear call and you water it down so no single person can pin it on you. You say maybe when you mean yes. You say things with a question in your tone. You pile on so many caveats that the decision loses its spine. And then people experience you as indecisive, which again feeds the exact story that you're trying to avoid. So hedging is our second one. And our third one is the opposite. It's overcorrecting into hardness. So what does that mean? Some leaders, because they know they're going to be doubted and people are going to give their own take and blah, 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 they're going to decide they're never going to show a flicker of uncertainty. So they get rigid. They can't say, I changed my mind, I'm so sorry. Even the word, I'm so sorry, like the sentence, I'm so sorry. Because changing your mind in front of an audience, that's waiting for you to be wrong, feels like you're handing them the ammunition. So they defend a decision way past the point where the data has already been turned. And that rigidness, my friends, that's not strength. It's fear. We just put it in a nice suit. So notice that all of these 3 come from the same root pressure. I am going to be looked at. I need to make sure that I have all my ducks in a row. And all 3 of them actually make your leadership worse. That's the cost. It's not the unfairness, although again, yes, we can talk about unfairness all day long. We can talk about all of those things. Believe me, I know it very well. There are days where I sit through and I think, God help me, this is insane. The real cost for you as a leader who's trying to develop themselves every single day is the scrutiny. If you let it, it's going to get into your decision making and make you worse at the very thing that you're being scrutinized for. So how do we protect the decision? I want to give you a concept that genuinely changes how leaders think, and it comes from poker of all places. There's a decision strategist named Annie Duke. She wrote this book called Thinking in Bets, and she's got a term I love. She calls it resulting. So resulting is this very human habit of judging how good a decision was by how it turned out. So if it worked out, what a good decision. But if it went badly, well, that's a terrible decision. And it sounds totally reasonable until you realize that in any situation with real uncertainty, which is basically every situation that you and I know that matters, you can take an excellent decision and get a bad result, or make a sloppy one and get lucky. The outcome is always some mix of your judgment and the roll of dice. So if you're only grading yourself on the outcomes, you're letting luck grade your leadership. Let me say that one more time. If you're only grading yourself on the outcomes, you're letting luck grade your leadership. And this is why it matters so much. When you're someone whose judgment already gets scrutinized more, you are way more exposed to resulting. Other people's bad outcomes get written off as bad luck. Your bad outcomes get filed under bad judgment. Same coin flip. Totally different story depend on who flipped it, right? So if you let that in, if you let the room's resulting become your own view of yourself, you'll start to believe your judgment is worse than it actually is, based on the outcomes you never fully controlled in the first place. So the discipline I want you to build is to pull those two things apart. You need to be able to say and really mean it. I made a sound decision with the information I had, with the process that I stand behind, and the outcome went the way it went. That sentence is your armor because the room might grade you on the outcome, but you really don't need to do that. You are better than that. You get to hold yourself to the standard of your process, which is the only thing you can actually control. Now, this isn't a trick to let yourself off the hook, okay? A good process absolutely includes going back and honestly reviewing your outcomes and updating it. But there's a world of difference between I'm going to learn from this result and I'm a bad leader because this result was bad. First one makes you sharper. Second one makes you smaller. Okay, my company's called In Vivo Leadership Strategies, and I always say live your life in vivo. So let's get practical because I don't want to just hand you a diagnosis, even if this is a diagnosis, but I want to give you a way to actually walk into a hard decision and come out the other side with your judgment intact. So even when the room's sitting there ready to grade you, I want you to be better. So 4 moves I'm going to share with you, and a couple before, one that you do during, and what you do after. We start with the first one. And the first one happens before the pressure even starts. Set your criteria in advance. Remember, we cannot measure ourselves with the outcome because that's not something we can control. The single most powerful thing you can do is to decide how you're going to decide before you're in the heat of a context. What does a good outcome actually look like there? What are the 2 or 3 things that really matter? What's your threshold? Write them all down. Put a date on it because when you set your criteria ahead of time, 2 things happen. It could change, right? That's why we want to put the date. But you can also make a cleaner decision and you create a record of your reasoning that exists totally separate on how it turned out. So for us, we know how the lessons change by knowing the date that we've done it versus what the outcome. And then we can understand the clear reasoning behind what we've done. You're pointing at a decision you've made on purpose for stated reasons back when you were thinking clearly. So that's your first move. Now, second move is to decide at the right altitude. Okay. So think about it this way. A lot of over-scrutinized leaders, they defend every single decision at the same intensity, and it just wears them out. I remember being on a project where there was a deadline that was coming up, and one of the people in our meeting kept saying, we need to do this, and it's all important. One of my other colleagues said, those are not all important. We need to come up with a list and prioritize it correctly. So not every call deserves your attention. And you need to ask yourself, is this a one-way door or is this a two-way door? So when we talk about a two-way door, it's reversible. So if you're wrong, good news, you can walk right back out and it's cheap, doesn't cost much. Those make them fast, let them be small. The one-way door is hard. It's impossible to undo. Those get your real attention. And when you stop treating every decision like a one-way door, you free up all this bandwidth to be genuinely excellent on the ones that actually count. So we've done 2 things now, right? One is we're going to understand what our criteria are. 2, we're starting to prioritize what matters to us, knowing the 2-way versus the 1-way. Now, our third move is for the moment itself. You're going to state the decision and the reasoning and then stop. So here's the decision, here's the why in 2 or 3 sentences. That's it. You do not need to deliver a dissertation. I've worked with so many leaders that feel like they're going to sound smart if they just keep talking for 5 minutes. When you're over explaining and you think you're doing a good job, it actually reads as anxiety for whoever is listening to it. And it's basically inviting the room to start negotiating a decision you've already made. And clarity is not coldness, okay? You can be warm. You can be brief. Those two things can exist at the same time. Actually, the brevity itself tells people you trust your own call. And they respond to that way more than they respond to the sheer volume of evidence that you're throwing at them. So come, share, finish. Stop over-explaining. Over-justification, we talked about. The fourth move is for after. You're going to separate the review of your process from the reaction of the room. When the results come in, do an honest review. Was my reasoning sound? This is why we date the reasoning, because it could have been like a year ago, right? What did I miss? What would I do differently the next time? That's real accountability that you can build for yourself, and it makes you better. But do that review against your criteria, not against the temperature of the room. Because every time you do that, the problem is not everybody practices emotional intelligence. Not everybody understands what's happening in the project. But people love to give their feedback, don't they? So what you may get may not be correct. Or what you get may be more of someone being upset with something that's happening in the culture of the company. If you let the loudest reaction set your self-assessment, you're right back to resulting. And you're letting other people in their comfort decide whether you're a good leader. So review it on the merits, update where you can, and then put it down. And I want to now go into more of a concrete way of thinking about this, because the frameworks are easy to nod along, but they're very difficult to actually live in. Before we end the podcast, I want to give you two examples. Yeah, I'll give you 2 examples of a real world issue. And how do you practice this in that real world issue? These are all real cases that I've pulled out from my experience, but I've changed the name, I've changed the context so that, again, I can honor whoever's gone through that and not basically share their detail. I want you to, for the first one, picture an engineering leader who's got to make a no-go call on a launch. We've all been there, right? The technology change. Is it a go? Is it a no-go? The data's mixed. There's real risk, not certainty, very real risk. And the pressure to ship is enormous because a lot of people have a lot riding on the timeline. And she knows it. It's very clear, crystal clear, that if she calls a delay and the risk never shows up, she's the cautious one who cost everybody the time. And if she ships and the risk does show up, she's the one whose judgment failed. Heads, she's too soft. Tails, she's not good enough. Coin is completely rigged, right? Unfair. It's all unfair. Okay. So watch what the framework does here. Before the meeting, what she's going to do is she's going to write down her criteria. The threshold for an acceptable risk on a launch like this. Decide in advance in actual numbers, not in the vibe and what it makes you feel, right? Because we all care about the metrics. Then she decides this is a one-way door because you can't unship a failure. So it gets her in her full, needs all my attention. And then in the room, she's going to say something like the call, the reasoning in 3 sentences, we're holding the launch, the risk crosses the threshold we set for this kind of thing. And I'd rather absorb a known cost and time than an unknown cost and safety. She stops talking. She doesn't over-explain. She doesn't over-defend. She already did her thinking on paper before the room could rattle her insane. And here's what I want you to know. When the dust settles, she's going to review that decision against the criteria that she wrote down, not against who annoyed her the most, who was the loudest in the room. So maybe the risk never materialized and people grumble that she was overcautious. She can look at her own record and go, given what I knew against the threshold I set in a clear-headed moment, that was the right call. And I would make that call again. Remember, this isn't arrogance that we're talking about. You are constantly having a check and balance with all of this. That's a whole difference between a leader who gets stronger under scrutiny and the one who just gets very eroded by it. Let's give you a second one because I want you to see this holds even true for if something isn't maybe transformational change, but more of people change. Picture a leader. They have to make a call about a person. She's got to decide whether to move someone off of a critical project. And that's a judgment call. It's the messiest kind. I hate doing it myself because it's about behavior and the fit and the trust. There's no metric that's going to settle that for you. And this leader knows if she makes this call, it's going to get read through a particular lens. If she's decisive, she's harsh. If she's difficult, and if she hesitates, then she can't make a tough personal call. So same rigged coin, but just again, different arena. So the framework that we just talked about looks a little different, but it has the same bones. Before the conversation, she's going to write down what that role actually requires for that person. It could be in behavioral terms, right? Separate from how she happens to feel about this person. Then she's going to ask whether it's reversible. So you're moving someone off of a project, and that's closer to a two-way door than firing them. So she calibrates, doesn't treat it like the end of the world, right? So she has the conversation now, after all of that, directly stating the decision and the core reason, and resisting the urge to either soften it, which we tend to do with people, or overbuild some case that turns into a character assassination, and before she knows it, it goes right to HR as a problem. And afterward, what she'll do is she measures the decision against the role requirement that she had defined. And again, it's not going to be against whether the person got upset, because of course they got upset. Upset isn't the same as being wrong. And what I love about this example is that it shows this isn't just a data-driven call. It's not a project management call. It worked precisely because it gives you something solid to stand on in exactly the situation where there's no objective answer and the scrutiny comes rushing in to fill the vacuum. When the decision is subjective, the criteria that you set in advance becomes your spine. Without them, you're deciding in the wind. And your environment, that wind blows a lot harder on you. And I think about where my clients actually lead. So it's in operating rooms, trading floors, aerospace program, defense, engineering organizations, high-stake calls, you name it. It's intense scrutiny. There's even research on what's called the glass cliff, where the people who are different from the usual leader are more likely to get handed the most precarious assignments, the turnarounds, the crisis, and the stuff most likely to fail. So they get the highest scrutiny decision under the worst possible conditions and then get judged on the outcome that were stacked against anybody. So if that's your circumstance, the framework isn't about pretending the scrutiny is not there. It's about building a way to decide that the scrutiny can't corrupt. This is where I stop for part 1. Hope that helped. If you have not subscribed or followed, please do so. We have a podcast episode every week. If you're interested to work with me as a coach or a consultant, please visit www.invivoleadershipstrategies.com. Live your life in vivo. And what we've talked about today, try to live it. Try to feel it so that we can start to go into part 2 with some lessons behind us. Thanks so much.